speak today about our stomach. Feeling sick to your stomach. That's the title of our episode. And we have so much to talk about. Thank you, Natasha, for co hosting with me this topic that is trending now.
Yes. Thank you so much for creating the space to be able to talk about not only the stomach but the whole digestive system, which is quite important. And even within that aspect of spirituality, I mean, our stomach is really, or our digestive system is really our intuitive tract as well, so it's like so many sayings come of that, feeling sick to my stomach or trust your gut, kind of a thing. And it becomes one of those kind of like one of the three brains, which is your brain, your heart, and your digestive system. So yeah, there's so much that we can talk about that in that sense. And from the space of excitement to the space of kind of like having that, deep kind of like wrenching feeling in your stomach when something goes wrong or when we're in fear, is quite interesting. But there's so much that connects into the digestive system that supports. And within spirituality, it's always usually when things are happening in the digestive system, it's usually a release. It's a letting go of something that's happening, or it's a holding on to something. So, for example, if we look at the different aspects, say, of, constipation, usually it's about somebody that tends to hold on to stuff. They don't let go, or, they keep rehashing the past. And that tends to kind of like start to create, they're not able to digest life in itself, which is very, very interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, there are. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I was going to say from a medical perspective, could you take us through the digestive system and what its function is within the body?
Well, I think it's one of the most important and largest organs, let's say, that also encompasses a lot of things because it's the stomach, is the mouth. It starts in the mouth. It starts with the esophagus, continues, then the stomach, then the intestines, and there's a whole process of the digestion that takes place in more or less 10 hours. So it's
Okay.
plenty of time that we need to assign to this function, and it takes up a lot of energy. And that's why also this old ways of eating constantly is not working well or for our stomach, because you are constantly letting it release everything so that they can process any kind of food, in spite
Yeah.
of being a snack, in spite of being something that is just trying to ease your hunger, because that is not really hunger. That is many times
Yeah.
anxiety. That is many times something that you feel due to the emotions that you have. And you also need, well, we also need to understand that our our intestines and the cells of the gut and all of the bacteria and the microbiota, that is the name, the technical name that you give to all these intestinal, um, let's say, realm and world that we have of bacteria, fungus, and some viruses. We need them in order to survive, because many of them produce neurotransmitters from the gut to our brain, and that's how they signals also many times emotion. And you mentioned fear, and fear is one of the emotions that triggers our digestive system, and it makes more complicated to digest things because we are afraid. And many times, and that's what is happening right now, people is afraid of what is happening in the world, and we just pass through years of uncertainty, years of things that were also loaded with fear. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have too much time to adapt to the things that were happening, and then we weren't all again released into a new world that changed, and the pace of the world is already in fast pace mode,
Mm-hmm.
and that takes a lot of credibility of people, and the easiest emotion to feel is fear. So that's why many people are having those stomach issues, whether they have ulcers, whether they have gastritis, whether they have leaky gut, whether they have
Mm-hmm.
any of those symptoms. It's just a reflection of the fear and the uncertainty that we are facing if you listen to just a piece of news.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that that contributed to putting on weight? Because I know that eating disorders, at least one of the statistics that I heard from one of the children's hospitals in Calgary said that had during COVID, it had increased by about 400% in children. Do you think it was because of that fear that we were holding on to, whether it was, something that, and food is a lot of the things that we can control, right? We can control what we put in our mouths, whether or can we? I suppose emotional eating is the other aspect of it that happens. So it's either like we stop eating or we consume too much. So do you think that that stepping into that fear and those stresses actually really, added on to a lot of weight gain or a lot of weight loss that happened as well?
Yes, yes, that was the first consequence for many people, and
Mm-hmm.
I witnessed many of my friends gaining weight in those periods of time that we were isolated completely, because it's the easiest way to comfort your
Mm.
emotions. The easiest and quickest way to is just consuming food and loaded with sugar.
Yeah. But it also keeps us safe from a spiritual, mental, emotional perspective. Like it's a way of hiding ourselves. It's a way of distorting what we look like so that we're not seen, right? Or don't want to be seen as well. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons that could be in with connection with that, in a sense of creating that safety, that extra weight that comes in and around that. And I think it's also a lot of us, even though I have never seen so many people walking their dogs at that time, but a lot of us were stagnant and stayed in our homes. So a lot of kind of like gut issues that I see from a spiritual perspective is a stagnation of energy that is there that hasn't been moved or hasn't been shifted. And yeah, I agree. I've heard Sadhguru saying that we should only eat when we're hungry and that we should really go to bed with an empty stomach, which is very interesting because from my parents' era, it's very much all about I need to eat 3 times a day and I can't go to bed on an empty stomach, because this is what's going to happen. And I'm like, but mom, you're going to be stuck with all of this food rotting for the next like 8 hours in your stomach, right? And that must give some sort of a mental, emotional effect. How
Mhm.
do you find that from the body?
Well, one of the worst things that we can do is to feast on food right before we go to sleep. Because, as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, the process of digestion starts from the mouth. It takes
Mm-hmm.
the esophagus, it takes all of this journey, let's say, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy, and there are a lot of things that need to happen. There is a lot of extraction, there is a lot of um, splitting up the food into small molecules so that we can absorb the nutrients. If we don't give enough time for this process to take place, we are not absorbing nutrients. We are just taking up space, and we are just loading our digestive system with food that probably also wasn't the healthiest choice when you were feasting like that just because you were emotionally triggered. And that also complicates the sleep quality that you are going to have, which creates a cycle because you don't sleep well. The digestive process is not performed well, so you are your body doesn't know what to do with this kind of situation. It's just confused. It's just like if you were in an avenue that is just loaded with traffic, and
Yeah.
traffic that is made up by, let's say, the policemen that are playing with the lights. That
Yes.
usually happens in Mexico, for example. And so that's what you do. You were playing with the digestive system. You were giving up too much food, and then your intestines and all of the things that need to be processed are just stuck, and you feel that you are hungry, which is just fake hunger because you really don't need to be hungry. You are already having a lot of food stuck in your body. That will lead to constipation also, and you will feed in the next morning with processed food, with sugary processed food, because that's the anxiety that is being created by the liberation of all of these substances that are produced in our microbiota. And you are priming your digestive system to produce let's say, there are no bad bacteria or good bacteria, let's say, but there are bacteria that produce more, triggering neurotransmitters or triggering hormones. So those bacteria are constantly being fed by this processed food, and they generate or they replicate more, they grow more when they have these sugar choices or processed food choices. No?
Which is so interesting that when you start looking at the sugar aspect of it, because the role in spirituality is that the gut is one of your intuition centers, and it also senses the internal body. If we're looking at constantly processing sugar, it actually blocks our intuition. So we are unable to really connect into spirit or into our intuition or really feel into our gut instinct. It kind of like numbs those feelings. The other thing that sugar does connected to gut instinct is it calcifies the pineal gland, which is known as your third eye, which is very, very interesting from that perspective, because yet again, we're being cut off from our unique connection to all that is, or to our higher consciousness, or to our higher selves, or to our guides. And as we move on through that, which is very, very interesting from that perspective. And yeah, usually people, I tend to notice, that suffer from constipation. There's a lot of intergenerational kind of like aspects of, say, for example, holding on to stuff and not processing stuff, right? It's that aspect of keeping a smile on your face. Nobody knows, or what will people think, or nobody knows what's happening internally. Meanwhile, there is that aspect of that, holding on to things that we don't want to hold on to, holding on to the past, living in the past, rehashing those traumas, which is very interesting because we keep traumatizing the bodies with our thought processes every time we visit those traumas in the past that haven't healed, which is important. And I certainly know from the aspect of when we've done really real deep healings that a lot of my clients will feel nauseous, or they will need to run to the loo to dissipate the stool, to actually let go of what they've been holding on to from a mental emotional perspective. So I find that very, very interesting as a way of detoxifying the body and releasing those emotions when we're ready to. So that is, I tend to find that quite an incredible process with that. And usually with irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, it's usually people on an emotional roller coaster that I tend to find. And it really is about, I think, your gut telling you to pay attention to the emotional turmoil that we're going through as well. And that is one way of also wanting to release everything as quickly as possible and not necessarily processing that. It is also an indication of processing emotions as well. So both of them are just in a different sense from that perspective. I don't know if you find that do many people that, tend to have either constipation or IBS, do they tend to be prone to more depression or, sadness or anxiety or stress?
Yes, usually that's the pattern, or that's the profile of people that have problems with the bowel and with this leaky gut, and with many of these gut issues. And you remind me of a friend that told me of a child that her mother is very strict with her in terms of the diet, but to the degree that she stresses her, and she pushes many times a lot of pressure on the child to be in a certain kind of weight, to be in a certain kind of shape, because she performs in ballet. And the child has a problem now with holding herself and not going to the bathroom. So that is really dangerous for many children, because they start develop this what is these issues with emotional eating or anxiety, and then they can develop into anorexia or bulimia or all of these ailments. And we don't notice that doing that is just taking too much pressure on children when we demand of them what we wanted to be. No, let's say, because that's a frustration that we pass on children, and we pass on them because we sometimes think that they need to be everything that we couldn't be, or they need to get everything that we couldn't do, or all of those things. And as they are children, they don't know what to do, and what they do is that they suffer from stomach issues, or they suffer from the gut, or they suffer from autoimmune diseases, or they suffer from anxiety. So those are the four lines, and those, all of them, develop from the gut, because that's where they process the food. That's where they process feelings, as you were saying also.
Absolutely.
So they need to learn how to process their own feelings, and they need to learn what do they want. So the best that we can do is to question them so that they discover by themselves what do they want, and just be guiding them towards their own fate, let's say.
Yeah. It's quite interesting because I grew up in that era of, and I don't know if this is what happened in Mexico as well, but it's like, you're not leaving until the table until everything is done, kind of a thing. It was like, and sometimes we used to spend hours waiting, playing with the food and, pushing it around and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's quite interesting that, as like you say, we don't know that we're doing harm, because that is the way we condition, that nurturing, that wanting to make sure that you've eaten everything that you're being, kind of like you have all that nutrition. But I just realized that like a lot of the times it's just like it's the conditioning that we have or the belief systems that we've been, put into place as to how to feed the body and how to feed the soul. So it's quite interesting because, yeah, I find that a lot of inflammatory issues have come in from the digestive system in holding on to those emotions or not being able to process that emotions. And that's where I start to see it from an intergenerational perspective as well, because if we think about our forefathers, they experienced war, they experienced famine, they experienced great things that they weren't or had the luxury to be depressed or to process those emotions. And there's a lot of studies that have been done where, say, for example, children or grandchildren of people that were part of the Holocaust tend to suffer from more anxiety and, more depression. And that's carried within our genetics as well. So it doesn't surprise me that we carry this load because we choose our families, we choose the genetics, we choose our lineage with all the awesome things that they are and all the things that they're not. How we've come to shift that and to change that. I think as we move forward and as we start to understand. However, I also believe that our food isn't as good for us as it used to be 50 years ago, which is also quite interesting. So that coupled with the emotional suppression, I've started noticing it's kind of like the scales have tipped way too far to one side, where now we find ourselves going back to that holistic way of living again. Even I've been trying to make bread with like 3 ingredients, like being done with this kind of like processed stuff. And being Portuguese, there's never a table dinner seating without any bread being present. So it's like, oh, what do we eat if we don't eat bread? So it's been quite a journey in understanding or getting an education around the nutrition that we put into our system. And it's like you were saying as well, the blockers that we have in our digestive tract. Like, so I invested in a bioresonance machine, and it told me that I wasn't absorbing half the bloody like nutrients and vitamins that I was consuming. And it was like, why? And when I checked into it, it's because within my gut, it wasn't like, I don't know if the type of food had lined my gut wall that it wasn't allowing these things to absorb. And I was just like, it was within my food that I was eating. And yeah, so I started changing a few things, and I feel like my body energy has started shifting as well, which is very interesting from that perspective, that we don't absorb the nutrients anymore because of the processed food that we're eating as well. Do you think that rings true, or what could it be? Because I'm sure a lot of people are going through trying to eat healthy but not absorbing the nutrition that they need.
Yes, it is true, and it happens due to the high consumption of these processed food or sugary foods that we have, and it also creates this cycle that I was speaking of before. That if we eat poorly and we make these choices, and we don't sleep well, we create this endless cycle of not sleeping well also, that is, let's say, as important as absorbing your nutrients is the sleep quality, because that's why you also don't have energy. So that lack of energy translates into this anxiety in the morning, and when you are anxious, what you usually eat is processed food or sugar food. That's what you crave for. And that's also a fake feeling that you created just by these loops of toxic habits, no? But we need to understand also that when our bodies are designed to be hybrids, to be not depending in the quantity of food, but in the quality of food. So we are good to go the whole day with just two meals a day. And that is something that I experienced myself. I started this program, let's say, of intermittent fasting more or less 5 or 6 years ago, and I started slowly to transition into taking out the snacks, taking out all of these in between meals that I sometimes have. And at the beginning, your body starts getting used to this change, and you can have some headaches. But these headaches are going to go just by drinking more water, and you can consume in this way of eating either tea or coffee, any of those two. And the coffee or tea allows also the body to regain this rhythm and eases the pain of the headache, and then you start changing the rhythm of your body. And it takes sometimes more or less, well, depends on each body, of course. I cannot speak for everyone, but in my case, it took more or less 2 months or almost 3 months to get used to this way of eating. And once I get used to just 3 meals, so very well packed with the things that I needed, because I perform also more or less 1 hour and a half or sometimes 2 hours of exercise. So I need more than the regular people. I started to take out one of the meals, and I said, well, I think I'm okay with two, because the third one for me it was complicated sometimes. When I took the third meal out and I just left with two, I just had 2 weeks of a little bit of feeling weak, a little bit in the exercise part. But once those 2 weeks passed, I start gaining energy in a very linear way and in an upward way also. And I felt stronger than before. The times that I did when I swam, the times that I did when I ran were much better than when I have 3 meals and the snack and all of those things. And my sleep was amazing. Really, I rested well. So it is just the clarity of my brain, the clarity of the ideas, the flow of my thoughts. It's also completely different than before. So allowing our bodies to get into those rhythms is the best thing that we can do to our digestive system, because once it adapts, once it takes its own rhythm, in each person is different, then you will feel those changes. You will feel that you gain energy, you will feel that you sleep better, you will feel with a better mood, and you will start to enjoy more life. So that will create a positive cycle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. Having started to experimenting with my food and dropping those meals and releasing the sugar, it was so interesting because, like, you have been slowly releasing the sugar as well. And it was so interesting because I ate a banana the other day and I was like, oh my goodness, this is sweet. Because you become really kind of like, numb to that, which is very interesting. On a spiritual perspective, we've also started noticing that once they call it an awakening, when you become aware that there's more than just the physical, and that we really are spiritual beings, that we're filled with gifts and all sorts of things like that. The other thing that it started to notice is a lot of people start to create intolerances to certain foods, whether it be gluten or alcohol as well is very, very interesting from that perspective. I know from my own personal journey in that sense, not that I was ever a very big drinker, and not that I ever drank too much in excess. I was mischievous enough when I was a little bit tipsy. I didn't need to get even more, but it was, I started noticing that as I continued on my spiritual awakening with alcohol. It was quite funny because I'd either be able to drink a ton and not feel anything at all, or depending on what type of alcohol and its frequency, or I'd have 2 sips and I'd feel instantly hungover.
Mm.
And it was brutal from that sense. And not only that, I don't like to do any kind of spiritual work when I have alcohol in my system, but I started to notice how my body started to shift and how it started to change in order to be able to manage the energetic frequency that I was digesting at the time. And it's so funny because when I do big channeling sessions, I cannot go into it with a full stomach. I can't do it. The lighter the food is, the better it is for me. If anything, when I'm doing kind of like big, and I need to drink a lot of water, which is quite interesting because water is a big conductor for the frequencies and the energies. So I tend to notice how my breathing shifts, where I start to breathe deeper, but I can't have a full stomach when I am, kind of like I do quite a bit of channeling within that. So it's very interesting that comes up with regards to how that awareness or that awakeness starts to actually affect your physical body, which is also the other thing that is quite interesting is that my grandmother, so I don't eat red meat. I don't think there's an issue with eating meat at all. I think people need to eat with what's right for them. But it was a sense of kind of like in her perception, which I think to some extent is true, and which is why people bless food. And it doesn't matter whether it's meat or an apple or whatever it comes from, is the energy of the frequency of the people that have touched it or the circumstances to which the animal had, died or been killed, or, which is quite interesting when it comes to the aspect of where kosher food, where the food is blessed. So it releases that energetic frequency, because she used to say to me that is the emotion that you are eating, the animal's emotion when, when you're eating it. So if it hasn't been done in a way that's humane or that is balanced, then this is the energy frequency that you're consuming and you're digesting this, which I found that to be quite fascinating at that time. And vegetables have feelings as well, and everything has, but it was just like that was the day of like really starting to kind of like turn down the scale of the emotions. And later on, when I did my Reiki course, I started to understand that, how we can neutralize that, and why the power of prayer. I don't know if you had that when we grew up very much in a Christian / Catholic / spiritual / Baptist, anything. But I remember as a child, we used to do a prayer and a blessing of the food before we ate it, which absolutely neutralized the energy. And I think that our body was able to digest that food a lot better in that sense than what we do now, where I don't know anybody that says their prayers before they eat, or slows down before they eat, or really becomes mindful of what they're putting into their body. And even for me, in the fast-paced, I have to sometimes slow down and go, okay, feel every vegetable, allow it to consciously nourish your body and your gut, and really feel into it, because we're in such a fast pace that we don't have time to digest our emotions. We don't have time to digest our food. We don't have time to do any of that. And it's about slowing down in order to be able to digest life, and to stomach life in that sense as well. So I find that aspect of it really, really fascinating. And it's just, we're so used to it. I have to consciously stop and go, okay, I'm eating this, let me feel this, And conversation at the table, we never used to be able to talk about things that anger or upset. It was always light conversations because it allowed that digestion, that food to be received by the body really, really well. That I think we're starting to miss that. And a lot of the times we're starting to let go of these old habits that perhaps supported us in so many ways.
Yes. One of the worst things that I can feel when I am pressure in terms of the work or in terms of the things that I have to deliver is that I need to eat fast. It's something that I don't like. The my meals or the time of the meal for me, it's really now is more sacred than anything. And when I am in the breakfast time, I try to, sometimes I'm used to, because that was a custom from my childhood, to watch something, but now I choose to watch something that calms me and helps me to be in a mood that I laugh, or that is giving me something good to think about. I don't usually watch things that stress me when I'm eating, and I usually don't want to talk about things that are complicated or emotional or all of those things. And I have had a lot of opportunities to prove that when we are eating, when we are having a meal, and we have a difficult conversation, or the other person is sharing difficult feelings or strong feelings about anything that you are talking about. Let's say that you go out with a friend and you have a meal with her or with him, and they start sharing difficult stuff.
Yeah.
For me, it's really bad because then either in that moment I start feeling bad in my stomach, or in the night, or the other day, the next day. So that's how important it is to be aware of our feelings and emotions when we are having a meal, because we unconsciously we are going to start releasing hormones of stress, hormones of raising the level of cortisol, raising the level of sometimes anxiety, just because you are listening
Yeah.
to something that is not giving you peace of mind or making you laugh. No, that's why
Yeah.
many times I choose things that make me laugh when I'm
Yeah.
eating, because I want to have fun and I want to feel good, and that's it. And when I am in the having a conversation with someone, I try to speak about things that we can process in an easier way. And then when we finish eating, we can speak about anything. But while I'm eating, I try to manage the conversation into an easier way, no?
Absolutely. No, I agree. So switching gears a little bit, a lot of the digestive, speaking mostly of the stomach and the intestines, definitely, I mean, the mouth, which is the throat chakra, and all the rest of that. But a lot of the times when we are working through digestive issues so it affects a lot of the times the solar plexus chakra, which is the digestion of our own personal power, or not being able to step into our personal power within that side as well, which is, yeah, I find that fascinating from that perspective as well. Our sacral chakra is related to the processing of our emotions, which is now we're really starting to look into those intestines and processing and our creativity. So when we have our creativity gets blocked, which makes sense because our creativity is connected to our third eye, in receiving the information, in visualizing what it is that we're wanting to create, right? So it kind of like ends up creating a block to that, and I can totally see how it doesn't allow us to process our intuition. And then the root chakra, which is very interesting from that perspective, is related to our feelings of safety and grounding and feeling here. So sometimes when we don't have that feeling of feeling safe or feeling ground, we also tend to put on more weight because it grounds us. It makes us heavier in order to kind of like step into who we are, or, you know, kind of a thing, which absolutely makes sense because of, you know, the rising cortisol levels and stress levels. It doesn't matter what you do and how much you eat or don't eat, or exercise or don't exercise. Like a lot of the times, like we don't lose that weight because we're unable. There is that mental as well, that you won't, like, stress is a horrible thing on our digestive system. It's brutal.
Yes, yes. You were talking about the weight, and the weight that I see that many people gain many times is just related to guilt and related to safety also. And the safety of feeling protected, but it that I think that it develops many times from not being accepted by who they are, not really being able to allow themselves to process emotions, of course, and being real with themselves, no? Because many times you can just answer to someone that asks you how are you feeling, and you say fine, or I'm good, or I'm okay, or but that's just on the surface. So
Yeah.
many times we want to speak how we feel, and we need a release, and we are not used to telling people how we really feel because we think that they are going to reject us, or
Yeah.
that they don't want to listen to our problems, or that they don't have time to listen, or whatever made up thought you
Yeah.
have. And
So,
we really need to speak more about our feelings. And I what I have perceived now, and this is something that I also talked with a friend, that society is changing in a way that many people is becoming more shielded, more let's say fake sometimes, and protected in a way that they don't want to speak about themselves, in a way
yeah.
that they don't know, and they are losing the, let's say, the ability to create connections with people because they are too busy, because they don't have time, because they don't want to process feelings, they are afraid of the feelings. And
Yeah.
if you can see, I mentioned guilt and I mentioned fear. And these two emotions are also linked in, or can be linked into a cycle that
Yeah.
that will create this overweight, and then the anxiety.
Yeah. So another aspect of unprocessed emotions, but more around unprocessed anger and resentment,
Mm.
is usually shown up as acid reflux. So the fire within us, right? That
Yeah.
we haven't expressed either, which is
Mm.
tends to show up when it, and that again is also linked to the solar plexus chakra, which is all about your self-esteem.
Yeah. And it is so funny that you mentioned that, because my ex mother-in-law has a problem with the
Acid
reflux,
reflux.
and she tends to be a people pleaser, and she also tends to be worried about everyone else, and at the end, or not at all, about her. And she also holds up a lot of feelings and a lot of verbal things that she needs to express, but she swallows that, and she doesn't, sometimes she doesn't notice what she's doing. And this is something that is now having a really big repercussion in her health.
Yeah.
That's what I told uh, Mary, and I told her,
Uh-huh.
you need to speak with her because she doesn't need to be doing what she's used
Yeah.
to do. You know?
It'd be surprising if she also suffers from bloating because it's also holding on to unprocessed thoughts as well. It's not being able to expand, which is the other side of it, which is, yeah, it's stagnant energy that it
Mhm.
needs to move, right?
It needs to move on, and it takes up, well, it looks for an outlet. It looks for an outlet and it looks for something so that you can pay attention. I was just listening right before we connected a video that Hay House released about the story of Louise Hay and
Mm,
all of the anger and all of the things that she had and how she developed cancer and how
yeah.
why she developed cancer and all of those ailments. And she was talking about this resentment and anger that can be
Mm,
translated into this eating up of yourself, you know.
yeah.
So if we just think about those things, it makes complete sense with what happens in the body. And when I think we spoke about this like 2 or 3 episodes before, when we arrive to the body, when we have symptoms already in the body, it's because there has been a lot of time already
Yeah.
in a certain pattern that you are doing.
Yeah.
And the only way for you to pay attention is the symptoms, is the pain.
Absolutely.
So we need to be more aware and mindful of who we are and speaking up our feelings and trying to express as much as possible what we don't agree with. And sometimes I think we are not able to say them, but we are always able to write them.
Yeah. That's a good way to express them.
Yes, and that's the safest way for the public and the audience and anyone that doesn't want to hear you. And you just have to write them and tear them up or burn them
And
down.
then burn them. Yeah.
Yeah.
The burning aspect of it tends to be very, very helpful.
Yes, and that's all you have to do because otherwise you are creating an environment inside of yourself
Hmm.
that is going to explode because it's going to look for an outlet. You know?
Absolutely. So get this. I was reading this article. I've still got it up here. There was a 17th century alchemist and physician. His name was Jan Baptist van Helmont, and he was born in like 1580 to 1644. And he did a whole bunch of experiments that he was working on, and it was so interesting because what he experienced, he said, was quite literally a gut feeling and a powerful sense of his emotions, perceptions, and even perhaps his whole identity, where somehow inextricably tied to his digestive tract. So basically, he said that the theory that he had, so according to him, emotions did not arise in the heart, as ancient philosophy stated, nor were they located in the brain. So, despite a growing consensus amongst university and educated anatomists and physiologists at the time, he insisted that the process of emotion, perception, and imagination took place in the organs of the digestive system.
Mhm.
So the stomach, he argued, was far more than just the factory for processing of the food. It was in fact the seat that and the mediator between the physical and the spiritual realms, which was the sensitive soul, which is quite incredible because he was around in the 15th century. So I
Yeah.
found that to be kind of like quite interesting that he talked about it as really the mediator between the physical and the spiritual, which is so interesting because when we did our last episode on the lungs, we spoke about the lungs also being a mediator with our breath and the energy and the chi, and bringing in that energy into our bodies as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, well, it's just that these three brains, as they are called, our gut, the heart, and the brain, they are just connected in an intuitive way that I don't think that we will be able to understand into more detail in the next following years in terms of the science, in terms of
Mm,
the specific molecules or things that are happening because they are just too fast. And as this scientist or this person that you were talking
mm-hmm,
about, he uh, explained so well that our gut senses before the things that they happen, and we all can agree on that because
mm-hmm,
whenever we have some experience of something that we don't feel or something that we sense or that fear or that anxiety or that anger, it always starts in
mm-hmm.
the stomach,
Yeah.
and it always starts in the butterflies. It
Mm,
always starts there, and from there it can move to the heart and then to the brain. No,
absolutely.
so
Absolutely. Yeah, we are absolutely fascinating how we are all connected and how all of these bodies are intertwined and all these messages. And a lot of the times we're distracted. I know people that before they eat something, they will ask the body if it's in alignment, and the body will either go, or yeah. And I think that's a good way of actually monitoring that and checking in as if this in alignment. I know we used to do a lot of kind of like muscle testing to see with food as well to see if it works or what those allergies are that the body's kind of like no, not doing this. And I find it fascinating because I did an Ayurvedic, just a very light Ayurvedic course. And, we only eat about 23% of the nutrients that we need a day.
mm,
No
yeah,
wonder by the time we reach into our 50s and 60s, the body's been so depleted of stuff. And
yeah,
we've replaced it with not so good stuff that it would start to also not function as much as we would like it to function. But the beautiful thing is it's a beautiful map into looking at the trauma that we still hold because
mm-hmm.
it's all stored in our body. And like say, it's like mostly in our digestive system because
And
we're unable to digest those emotions.
this is a perfect, I think, segue to speak about the ancestral lineage that we also carry, because I was remembering this documentary with Louise Hay that she spoke about her parents and the story of her parents, and she was only interested in the story of her parents when she was diagnosed with cancer because she
Mm,
had a lot of resentment and she had a lot of anger that she needed to process. And she said when she discovered the story of her parents and how they suffer, then she could forgive. And once she forgave them, she was able to heal. And
yeah.
that's something that I have also done in my life with my father. And I also asked him about his past and about what happened in his story with his father and with his grandfather, because I was
Mm-hmm.
interested in that lineage of the male side.
Yeah.
And when I understood their story, I could also release a lot of anger and a lot of not resentment. I had already processed many of those things,
Mm-hmm.
but but a lot of anger I could release. And once I release that, opportunities start to came to my life, and things start to flow. And that doesn't mean, and I want to clarify, because many people can say, well, what if my father or what if my mother is too toxic to be around, in spite of forgiving her or whatever? Well, you can forgive, but that doesn't mean that you need to be so attached like any other person. You just need to find out what is the balance of you in terms of the relationship that you create with your father or mother, and just be around them in a way that you don't feel overwhelmed by how they are, because they are not going to change. They are already in a certain way like that, no? But you need to accept that, and the balance that you can find is how much time or how many times or you can be around them, no?
I think it's important to look at those patterns, those intergenerational patterns of the conditioning of the things that we do. It's important because, in one sense, it's a reason why we chose that family, to release those patterns, to release that pain, to release that. And I like what you say, because forgiveness is a huge tool in letting go of what you've been holding on to, because forgiveness doesn't excuse the act, but it releases you from being attached or anchored to that trauma, to that person. And a lot of the times, if we start to look at it in the sense of how did that support me, which I know is a weird way of looking at this, you will see that somehow you needed that in order to move through life. And it's when you start to realize that you don't need it anymore that it becomes an awareness of what is there. So, for example, I had a client of mine who said, I was a very angry teenager and I needed to leave my home and go make my own way. And, you know, I got into the oil and gas industry. And I was like, do you realize that without that anger, you wouldn't have survived that oil and gas industry? You wouldn't have survived those times. So it's like you've needed that. But now that you don't need it anymore, you're ready to let go of it. But forgiveness is an imperative part in letting go of the trauma and the people that we no longer wish to be connected to. And then the one step beyond that is, again, looking at what is the lessons that I've learned.
Yes.
And we've sat at the table. We tend to have dinner at the table, and like after dinner, like just talking about like, oh my goodness, I've just rediscovered this pattern that it was straight in my face. And then I give an example and I'm like, and my mom lives with me as well. So I was like, oh, vovó, which means grandmother in Portuguese. She did, like my grandmother did it to my mother and my mother did it to me. And I've done it to you girls. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, can you see this? We have to change this pattern. You know, we have to forgive and let go. Because a lot of those patterns, a lot of those conditions, a lot of those things were put into place as a survival mechanism for our ancestors, for our parents. But it's no longer needed because times have changed. But it was how they survived the past. They needed to shut down their emotions. They needed to people please in order to survive. They needed to do all of these things in order to survive. So, of course, we come into that environment needing that tool or thinking that we need that tool, or we do need that tool to a certain time, and then we're ready to let go of it. So it really is quite a beautiful understanding once we start looking at, okay, I've looked at this, I've forgiven this. How did it work for me? How did it make me into the person I am today? How did it change the direction in my life? Did it birth purpose? Right? So it's, I tend to see it and from that perspective, in okay, how did that work for me? And then beyond that, you end up moving from a space of forgiveness to a space of gratitude for that person, for that situation. And some of them are dire. That I've heard stories that are like, oh my goodness, who would choose that? But I don't look at it from that perspective. I actually look at that being and that soul from a perspective like, oh my goodness, the soul has taken on so much in order to clear and to forgive and to let go. So I find that very, very fascinating. But it also tends to help the digestive system in letting go. And that's why a lot of the times during a healing, or people feel nauseous, and it's like, yeah, let it go. Like, really let that go, because you've been holding on to that for such a long time. So just let it go.
Yes, yes, I
Mm.
think that um, as we can see that all of our emotions are connected to this gut system, and they are connected even to generations of pain, generations of patterns, generations of things that we learn in the wrong way to do. And many times, well, not in the wrong way, well, but in a way that
Mm-hmm.
we were able to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we use those emotions to push through many times. Also, anger, in my case, served me in the purpose of being so independent and driven into what I wanted. And but there was a time and a place that it was hurting me also.
Yeah.
So it serves for a while. It can go into this energy that gives you drive,
Mm-hmm.
but you need to release it. Otherwise, it starts to create problems
Yeah.
inside of you, and those problems are many times related to digestive issues. No.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are a few things that, from a holistic perspective, in a sense of mindful eating. So blessing your food, raking your food, clearing your food, eating slowly. They say you're supposed to chew your food. They say, what do you
20
say? Drink your food and chew your liquids, because of the digestive enzymes that it starts to create. And you should actually chew your food at least 33 times. My grandmother used to tell me that before swallowing it, and it makes sense because then it becomes liquid. So you get to drink your food and chew your liquid, because it allows you to absorb those vitamins. Mindfulness, exercise, or even working with like yoga. A lot of people have emotional releases during yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, any of those kind of like modalities that get the energy flowing, or just flat out exercise like you do, like 2-3 hours of that tends to help quite a bit as well. Meditation tends to help too, but processing, like really step into observation of those feelings, understand them, forgive
Mhm.
yourself, forgive others, and then let them go, however they come out, because you've released that situation when you're no longer triggered by it
Mhm.
as well. And look for support. Find the practitioners, find the friends that are ready to listen to you, that you can voice your feelings to. And if you don't want to mix that with your friends, find a counselor or a psychologist or somebody that to support you, or some sort of a therapist. And then I find that craniosacral therapy is great for releasing from the fascia. It's because I know how the system works, or somato emotional release, kind of like modalities, or even EFT tapping, that tends to help release a lot of the trapped emotions that we are feeling. And sometimes we don't have to really re-experience the trauma. Sometimes it's okay to let go, but sometimes we do need to go there in order to resolve it as well. So it's being
Mhm.
open to all of that. Those are my suggestions
Yeah,
in dealing with everything that we hold on to.
I agree with all of them, and I have tested many of them also in my life. And I think that also that's what I do all now that I'm studying Reiki and doing these therapies with
Hmm.
Reiki. I have seen that also giving Reiki to the food is helping a lot. And as you mentioned also, when I am doing Reiki to myself and I am just giving or Reiki to another person, I really get thirsty, not hungry, and I work
You're
better
thirsty.
also when I am not near from the meal. If I'm in a fasting mode, that's much better. So
Yeah.
it works like that. Your intuition will be awakened also if you start finding the rhythm of your body. That doesn't need to be the 5 meals that they predicate. I
Yeah.
think 3 meals, everyone can be much better.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that is not a generalization. That is just the way we are designed,
Hmm.
and that's how we work better. So I think
Beautiful.
we spoke about many areas. We cover plenty of ground. So I'm just left to encourage people to speak to us, to tell our their own journey with emotions and the gut. Any kind of examples of stories that you can give us, it's gonna be answered, and it's gonna be also well received here. So thank you, Natasha, for
Thank
this
you, David.
spiritual side of the God.
Thank you for the physical side of the gut and how that works.
And we will listen to each other on our next episode. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye, everybody.